The wind made no sound, only a hush that gathered in corners and clung to the eaves of the cabin like an old sorrow. Snow pressed against the windows, slow and constant, blanketing the world in white as if trying to erase it. Inside, the fire burned low, casting a tired amber light over the plank floor, and Delilah Marin moved like a ghost between stove and window, wrapping another layer of wool over her shoulders. It was her 6th winter alone. She'd long since stopped counting the days, though some nights she whispered them into the dark like prayers no one answered. The cabin had once held the scent of bread and pipe smoke and the sound of her father's fiddle. Now it held silence. Silence and something heavier, memory, maybe, or the weight of being unchosen. The townsfolk had called her cursed after the preacher's son left. Left her with a scar from a riding accident and no name to wear on her hand. After that, they stopped speaking her name and started whispering it. She never minded much. Not until tonight. Because tonight the snow fell heavier than it had in years. Even the forest seemed to hold its breath. The hens refused to cluck. The horses hadn't touched their hay. And the fire, no matter how she fed it, crackled like it was afraid of waking something outside. She had just turned from the window where the trees stood thick and still as mourners when the knock came. It wasn't frantic. It wasn't desperate. It was slow. 3 times. A pause. Then once more. Delilah stood frozen, the tin cup in her hand slipping slightly from her grip. No one ever came here. The road up to her cabin wound steep and lonely, barely a path in the warm months, near impossible once the snow came. She moved toward the door, barefoot but steady, and rested her palm on the frame. Her heart knocked louder than the fist had. Another beat. The fire hissed. Then, just as she unlatched the bolt, a gust of wind shook the chimney, and the door opened before she touched it. He stood there. Tall. Shirtless. A man built like he carried mountains. Snow clung to his chest and shoulders in soft patches, already melting in places where his skin radiated heat. His dark hair was wet, his lips blue. But it was his eyes, dark, sunken, hollow with exhaustion, that stopped her. In his arms, wrapped in a rough burlap sling, was a baby. The child whimpered softly, no louder than a mourning dove in the distance. He didn't speak at first. Just looked at her as the wind howled behind him. Delilah took a step back. He blinked snow from his lashes. "Can we stay one night?" His voice was hoarse. The kind of voice that came from shouting into storms or weeping into them. Delilah glanced down at the baby. A wisp of hair peeked out. Pale. Damp. "You're both near frozen," she said quietly. He nodded. Said nothing more. She opened the door wider. He stepped inside. The storm seemed to slam the door shut behind him with a finality that felt like more than wind. She gestured to the chair by the fire. He didn't sit. Just stood there dripping, snow melting in thick droplets down his back. "Blanket," she muttered, already pulling one from the basket. The baby coughed once. A high, wet sound that twisted something deep inside her. She moved quickly now, taking the child from his arms before he could protest. The sling was wet. Her hands brushed the man's chest as she unwrapped the baby, and she felt the heat radiating off his skin not from warmth, but from fever. "Name?" she asked softly, cradling the child in her arms. "Mercy," he said. "Yours?" "She was my wife's. Now she's mine." Delilah didn't ask more. Not yet. She carried the baby toward the fire, setting her gently in a wool-lined cradle that hadn't rocked in years. A cradle her father carved for grandchildren that never came. The man watched. His eyes didn't blink. His hands remained at his sides like they were afraid to move, like they'd done something wrong too many times. "You're shirtless," she said plainly. Had to keep her warm. Delilah moved toward the hearth. "What's your name?" He hesitated. "Bo." "Bo what?" "Bo Ransom." She stirred the coals and added another log. He sat then. Finally. Shoulders sagging. Like a man who'd carried grief up a mountain and now had nowhere else to climb. For a while, the only sound was the fire and the tiny breaths of a sleeping child. Delilah ladled broth into a tin cup and set it on the table. She made no gesture, but Bo rose slowly and took it. He sipped once. His jaw trembled. The cabin smelled like thyme and wood smoke and something new, the smell of another life pressing against the edges of hers. He hadn't said what he wanted. Just warmth. Just shelter. Just one night. But nothing stays one night. Not weather. Not pain. Not people like him. She studied him as he stared into the fire. The long scar that ran from his collarbone to his ribs. The cracked knuckles. The way he kept glancing toward the cradle. He hadn't come to take anything. She saw that now. He came to give the last of what he had to keep that child breathing. Delilah stood near the door and watched the snow swirl in the lantern light. The storm was growing louder. Angry. She could feel it coming not just in the wind, but in her bones. Trouble didn't always announce itself with fists or flames. Sometimes it knocked soft and slow and carried a baby. And sometimes, against every instinct, you opened the door anyway. She turned back inside. Bo had fallen asleep in the chair, his hand curled protectively toward the cradle. She didn't move him. She stepped lightly into the next room and pulled the quilt from her father's bed. Laid it over him with a gentleness she hadn't used in years. Then she lit the small lamp and set it near the cradle. The baby stirred once, but didn't cry. Delilah stood beside her for a long time, one hand on the edge of the wood, as if anchoring herself to something she'd forgotten how to believe in. She whispered the child's name once. Mercy. Then she moved back to the doorway, sat down with her knees tucked to her chest, and watched the storm from the inside. For the first time in 6 winters, the snow didn't feel like it had come to bury her. It felt like it had come to bring something back. The snow stayed 3 days longer than the calendar said it should have. The drifts clung to the hills like old regret, refusing to melt even when the sky turned from silver to blue. Wind no longer howled, but the hush it left behind was deeper, more watchful. Like the land was holding its breath. Bo didn't say much in those days. But he moved with purpose. Delilah watched from behind the curtain as he rose before dawn, slipping out of the cabin barefoot, sleeves rolled up, axe in hand. He split wood like the axe steadied him. Each swing was clean, sure. No wasted motion. When he carried the logs back to the porch, his arms slick with sweat, snowflakes melted the moment they touched his skin. He still hadn't asked to stay another night. And she hadn't told him he could. But he did. And she let him. It wasn't that she trusted him. Not yet. It was something quieter. A recognition. Like the ache he carried had a shape her body already knew. Mercy stirred often, waking with small, dry coughs that twisted Delilah's gut. She boiled herbs, crushed pine needles into cloth for the child's chest. She held her close during the fevers and whispered prayers she hadn't spoken since her mother died. Bo never asked how she knew to care for a child. He just watched, eyes soft and wide in a face that didn't know softness. On the second night, he spoke again. Just 3 words. She's getting better. Delilah didn't answer. Not because she doubted it, but because hope, spoken aloud, had a way of turning to smoke. Instead, she asked, "You always carry her that way? Wrapped tight to your chest?" "She cries if I don't," he said. "Can't bear blankets anymore. She remembers drowning." Delilah's spoon paused mid-stir. She turned. Bo stared into the fire. The river rose too fast. Took our wagon, our mule. My wife. I pulled Mercy out of her arms. He looked down. Couldn't pull her too. Silence stretched between them. Delilah returned to the pot, the scent of onions and sage thick in the air. "You're lucky she's alive." Bo nodded once. "Ain't sure I am." She didn't tell him not to speak that way. Didn't offer him comfort. Just ladled stew into bowls and set one beside him.
Some grief didn't need mending. It only needed company.
That night, she left the door to her room cracked open.
Not enough to say anything.
Just enough that if Mercy cried, she'd hear faster. Bo slept sitting up again, hand cradling the cradle, head against the post. By morning, the snow had softened, and so had something between them. She caught him repairing the garden fence with nails he'd scavenged from an old drawer.
No one had asked. He just did it.
I didn't plant anything this year, she said, stepping out into the crisp air.
You will next year, Bo said, not looking up. Delilah crossed her arms. You plan on staying that long? Bo finally met her eyes. No, ma'am. But I figure someone should make it easier for you to stay. She didn't answer.
But she watched his hands, broad, calloused, slow, and noticed how steady they were, like they'd built more than fences before.
Late afternoon, Mercy laughed. It was the first time. Delilah had been holding her, walking slowly in front of the cabin, pointing out the bluebirds returning to the pine. The baby reached out, clapped twice, and let out a bubbling sound so pure Delilah nearly wept from the sound of it. Bo froze in the doorway, hammer in hand, as if he'd heard an angel speak. Delilah turned, still holding Mercy, and met his gaze. No smile passed between them. No words. Just the echo of that laugh, floating over the snow like light through stained glass. That evening, Delilah brushed her hair for the first time in weeks. She sat near the mirror, the small cracked one she'd kept from her mother's things, and let the strands fall around her shoulders. The scar on her back, a pale seam from the fall off her mare at 16, peeked out from her nightgown. She didn't cover it. She simply studied it. Like it had less power now. Like it was just skin, not shame. Bo knocked gently before entering. You need anything? She turned to him. Didn't flinch. He noticed her back. His eyes paused, but they didn't shift. She waited. He didn't say sorry. Didn't look away. Just said, that happened young? 17. He nodded once. Still beautiful. The words came plain. Without weight. Like he meant them the way he'd say a field was green or the sky was wide. Delilah blinked. You shouldn't say things like that. Why not? Because I might believe you. He stepped further into the room, baby cradled in his arms, already half asleep. Then maybe you should. She stood. I'm not looking for a man. I'm not looking to be one. They stood there for a long moment, the oil lamp flickering, Mercy breathing soft and slow between them. I know what they say about me in town, she said finally. I don't care what they say. I do, she whispered. Bo adjusted the child on his chest. Then let me help you carry it. Delilah looked at him, really looked at him. Shirtless again, despite the cold. A habit, or a defiance, she couldn't yet tell. His chest bore old wounds, burns, maybe. Scars of someone who'd chosen to save others instead of himself. She said nothing. But when she passed him to take the lamp, her fingers brushed his. She didn't pull away. That night, when she tucked Mercy in, she placed her old patchwork quilt over the cradle. The one she made for a child that never came. And when Bo turned in to sleep by the fire again, she brought an extra pillow. Didn't say why. Didn't have to. Some men didn't speak with their mouths. And some women didn't need them to. As the moon rose silver over the silent trees, Delilah stood at the doorway one last time. Snow still blanketed the earth. But in her chest, something was beginning to thaw. The snow had thinned, but the gossip traveled thick. Bo saddled the mule, an old swayback thing he'd borrowed from the neighbors down near the creek bed, and headed toward town just after sunrise. He left his boots muddy on the porch, wrapped Mercy in a pine-scented blanket, and carried her close against his chest. Her small breath fogged the curve of his collarbone as they passed the river's edge, quiet now after its winter rage. Delilah watched from the window, arms folded tight. The curtain barely moved as she followed their shape down the winding trail. She didn't like him going. Didn't like the thought of what they'd say when they saw him.
But the child needed more than fire and prayers.
She needed medicine.
And Bo, he was the kind of man who would walk straight into fire if it meant saving what he held. In town, the streets were slushed with boot tracks, cold wagon ruts stiffening under a weak sun. Bo stepped carefully, nodding once to the shopkeeper's boy, who gawked at the sight of him, bare-chested again, skin bronzed and marked by a long scar that curved over his ribs. The silence around him wasn't empty. It swelled. Mrs. Ida Crowley, wrapped in her fox-trimmed shawl, stood frozen on the steps of the millinery shop, eyes sharp as hatpins.
Her lips pursed like she'd bitten into something sour.
"Well, I'll be," she muttered. Deputy Lyle Varnes stood leaning outside the mercantile, chewing tobacco with the slow smugness of a man who'd waited too long to be useful. "She took him in," Mrs. Crowley whispered loud enough to be overheard.
"And his baby.
Lord knows what for." The words spread like lantern oil.
Bo didn't flinch.
He walked straight into the apothecary, asked for peppermint bark, mustard seed, and pine resin.
Paid in coin. Didn't smile. Didn't speak unless he had to.
The baby coughed once in his arms, and every head turned like it was thunder. The clerk, a wiry lad who'd once called Delilah witch-spun behind her back, leaned across the counter.
"You stayin' up there with her?" Bo's eyes didn't waver.
"She's the reason Mercy's still breathing."
He left without another word.
Back at the cabin, Delilah scrubbed the porch with a stiff brush, though there was no dirt to scrub.
Her hands moved too fast, knuckles red and raw.
Inside, stew simmered unattended, and the old clock ticked too loud in the quiet.
When Bo returned, he said nothing about town.
Just placed the medicine down and sat beside the cradle. Mercy's cheeks were pink again, her cough lighter.
But Delilah knew.
She could see it in the way he pressed his palm against his jaw.
Like he'd bitten back things all morning and was trying to hold them inside. She didn't ask what they said. She already knew.
It took just one visit for the whispers to take root. By the next day, 3 riders passed her land without slowing. One of them, a girl barely out of childhood, spit toward her gate.
Delilah stood on the porch and watched the spit freeze in the snow. Her fists trembled. But she didn't flinch. By week's end, the mail wagon stopped coming.
The cloth she'd ordered, pale cotton for Mercy's sleeping gown, never arrived. At the well, a neighbor who used to share yeast offered no greeting.
Just dipped her bucket and left, eyes to the trees. Bo saw it all.
He'd lived a life full of silence. But the cruelty of this one ran quieter, sharper.
The kind that didn't bruise skin, only hearts.
"You want me gone?" he asked one evening, voice low, shoulders hunched as he stood beside the porch rail.
Delilah didn't answer at first.
The night was clear, stars hanging low like icicles over the pines. "They want you gone," he added. She stepped out, joining him. Her shawl wrapped high around her neck. "They wanted me gone long before you came."
He looked over at her. "Then why take me in?"
"Because Mercy cried."
"That all?" Delilah met his gaze. "No."
The wind shifted.
Bo turned toward the woods. Somewhere, an owl hooted once, soft and far away.
"I can go," he said.
"Find a way to town. Maybe south." Delilah swallowed hard. "And leave me with all this talk like it was true?" He nodded once.
"I don't care what they think of me.
But I hate what they're doing to you."
She was quiet a long time before saying, "I've lived with lies longer than I lived with truth."
"They don't scare me like they used to." Bo turned then.
He stepped closer, hands loose at his sides.
"I don't want to be a weight." "You're not," she said. "You're a mirror." That stopped him. "A mirror?" She nodded.
"They see you in my doorway and remember they never came knocking."
Bo looked down, then back up.
"They never deserved to."
Mercy cried from inside just once. Delilah didn't move. "I'm not ashamed of you, Bo."
He took a breath like he hadn't done so freely in days.
The next day, the town learned he hadn't left.
Mrs. Crowley stood at the post office steps again, lips pursed tighter than before.
A man like that, staying under a woman's roof. And her? We always knew she'd turn out strange. Someone said, but the baby's lookin' better. Another muttered, he built her a new barn fence. Yet another added, they say she smiled. The gossip twisted, softened, turned on itself like a snake eating its own tail. Because hate burns fast, but kindness lingers like smoke in wood. It changes the way things smell. That night, Delilah set 2 chairs on the porch instead of 1. Bo brought her coffee without being asked. They didn't speak of town again. Instead, they watched Mercy fall asleep with her hand curled around the quilt Delilah had made. And for the first time in years, Delilah Marin didn't dream of running. She dreamed of staying. The sun came early that morning, cracking gold over the ridge like someone had finally forgiven the land. For the first time in weeks, the snow didn't creak underfoot. It melted in ribbons along the eaves, whispered down gutters, dripped soft as lullabies. Chickadees called from pine branches heavy with thaw. Delilah stood barefoot on the porch, steam rising from her coffee cup, eyes closed. She'd forgotten how quiet the world could be without judgment. Just wind, birds, breath. Inside, Mercy cooed. Not cried. Not whimpered. Cooed. Bo was rocking her slow in the bentwood chair. One big hand curled around her back, the other steady on the armrest. His boots were off, shirt draped over the cradle's edge. A scarred shoulder rose and fell with each sigh. She's warmer, Delilah said, stepping in. Bo nodded. She slept through. You did that, she said. He didn't answer. But the look he gave her, just a glance, not quite a smile, held the weight of something sacred. Delilah knelt by the hearth, stoked the fire, and ladled a bit of broth into a tin cup. Mercy stirred again and, as Bo adjusted her gently, a tiny sound emerged, half laugh, half hiccup. Delilah turned. Was that? Bo froze. Mercy blinked up at him, then did it again. She smiled. Mouth wide. Eyes bright. Bo leaned forward as if he couldn't believe what his own child was doing. His lips parted but no words came. Just a deep breath, broken at the edges. Delilah's throat tightened. She smiled for you. Bo looked up. That's the first time. I know. They stayed like that for a long moment, her kneeling by the fire, him cradling the child, Mercy beaming between them like a dawn neither dared name. That day, Bo didn't chop wood. He didn't patch fences or fetch water. He just carried Mercy around the yard, speaking low to her like she was someone who'd saved him. Delilah baked. She hadn't in weeks, but her hands knew what to do. Flour dusted her cheeks. Her apron strings fluttered as she opened the window and let the scent of yeast and cinnamon drift outside. Bo wandered close, barefoot still. Smells like something worth staying for. Don't get used to it, she said, though her smile betrayed her. He leaned in the doorway, Mercy sleeping against his chest again. Too late. Later that afternoon, she braided her hair again, not tight like before, but loose, soft. Her fingers didn't tremble this time. She didn't pin the strands behind her ears. Let them fall. Bo saw it. Said nothing. But that night, he left a wildflower on the kitchen table. No note. No vase. Just a single white bloom with snow still clinging to its stem. She found it just after sunset. Held it. Smelled it. Didn't cry. But her fingers lingered on the petal longer than they needed to. Bo sat by the fire, Mercy asleep in the crook of his arm. Delilah stood behind him. That flower, it's not blooming season. He tilted his head. Found it by the east tree line. You went looking? I go where I want, he said with a slight grin. She let the moment stretch. Then, you don't talk much about her. He knew who she meant. My wife, he asked. She nodded. He shifted Mercy, careful not to wake her. Her name was Ruthie. Married young. She liked green things. Couldn't cook. Laughed at everything, even funerals. Delilah sat across from him. You miss her? Like skin misses sun. They both looked at the fire. She died holding Mercy, she asked. Didn't cry out. Just slipped. I thought she was asleep. Delilah's breath caught. Bo glanced down. I ain't touched another woman's hand since. Silence bloomed again, but it wasn't cold. Delilah whispered, I haven't let anyone touch mine. He looked up. Then maybe we're both just waiting on the same thing. What's that? Someone brave enough to mean it. The fire popped softly. Outside, the moon lifted slow over the pines. The snow had begun to sink back into the earth. Bo rose, cradling Mercy. He stepped close to Delilah, paused. She didn't move away. Instead, she reached out and laid her palm over Mercy's tiny back. Her fingers brushed his chest. Warm. Steady. They stood like that, three bodies stitched together by breath. No promises. No vows. Just presence. Later, after the child had been tucked in and the fire died low, Delilah stepped outside. The sky was clear. Stars scattered like shattered glass. She pulled the shawl tight around her shoulders, but not because of the cold. Bo joined her a moment later, silent. They stood side by side, not speaking, just watching the smoke rise toward the heavens. And then, so quiet it barely counted as speech, Delilah said, she smiled today. Bo nodded. So did you. The thaw came early. Not all at once, but in slow, shy gestures, ice surrendering beneath wagon wheels, birds returning one cautious wingbeat at a time, and boots no longer sinking deep into slush. The town came back to life with a cough and a squint, as if waking from too long a sleep. And with spring came the talk again. She took him in, they said. But now they added more. She's smiling. He's still shirtless. The child's hair's growing. They haven't left. At first, the town watched with the same suspicion it gave to new saloons and strangers in church pews. But as Mercy's cough faded and the color returned to her cheeks, judgment had to make room for something it wasn't used to. Curiosity. Still, not all hearts thaw with the land. Mrs. Crowley made sure of that. She planted seeds of disapproval with practiced hands, whispered through her lace gloves to every woman who still listened, insisting that Delilah had turned her back on womanhood's virtue by letting that man, who had no kin, no pastor's word, no gold band, build her fences and warm her nights. Delilah heard it all. Bo, too. But neither bent. They lived as they had, quietly, deliberately. She cooked. He worked. Mercy bloomed. Then came the Founders' Day market. A yearly thing, all bunting and bread stands and fiddle songs. It brought even the most tight-lipped widowers out from their porches, and filled the air with the kind of noise that left no space for silence to settle. Bo hadn't wanted to go. Delilah had. Let them see us, she said, not bitterly, but with a kind of calm he'd never heard from her. They'll say more, he warned. They already have, she replied. He didn't argue further. They dressed plainly. She in her old indigo dress, pressed clean and belted tight. He wore his best, still no shirt beneath the vest, though he'd sewn the tear himself. Mercy wore a bonnet Delilah had stitched from scraps, with ribbon the color of cornflowers. They walked down the hill just past noon. Every head turned. It wasn't just that Bo towered over everyone or that Mercy was reaching one hand toward every passing dog. It was the way Delilah walked beside them, straight-backed, chin up, as if shame had no place left to live inside her. A hush followed them like a cloak. Mrs. Crowley gasped audibly. Deputy Varnes narrowed his eyes and stepped into their path near the mercantile, arms folded, star gleaming on his chest like it had something to prove. You ain't from here, he said flatly to Bo. No claim. No trade paper. No blessing. Bo said nothing. You've been livin' with her? Delilah spoke first. He saved a child's life. Still ain't right, the deputy barked. This ain't how things are done. Bo handed Mercy to Delilah. Then stepped forward. And knelt.
Right there, in the dust and pine needles and sunlight, in front of the townsfolk who had sneered and whispered and turned cold shoulders for months. He reached into his vest pocket, pulled out a small band of silver, dulled and scratched. His wife's old wedding ring. The crowd held its breath. "I got nothing fancy," Bo said, voice steady. "But if you need something proper to measure a man, then here it is." He looked up at Delilah. "I came to your door with nothing but sorrow. You gave us warmth. You gave her a chance. You gave me a reason." He bowed his head. "I ask for your hand, not for pity, not to fix what broke, but to build what we still got time to build." Delilah stared down at him. Her fingers clutched Mercy against her chest. Her cheeks flushed, not with shame, but with something older and deeper, pride. "You shouldn't kneel to people who never knelt for you," she whispered. "I'm not kneeling to them," Bo said. "I'm kneeling to you." A long silence passed. Then Delilah stepped forward, lifted him gently by the shoulders. "I don't need a ring to know who stayed," she said. And she kissed him. Not for show. Not for defiance. But for truth. Mercy clapped. A small voice in the crowd laughed. And the town, so accustomed to judging from behind curtained windows, found itself without words. Later, Mrs. Crowley would say the kiss was indecent. That love without permission was rebellion. But others, quiet folks with old wounds and older hearts, began to see it differently. "She never begged for kindness," one said. "She built it with her hands." "They didn't make a scene," said another. "They made a life." A few months later, they married beneath the dogwood trees near the edge of the Marin property. No church bells. No preacher. Just a fiddler, 2 witnesses, and Mercy sitting in a laundry basket full of wildflowers. Bo wore a shirt that day. Delilah removed his vest herself when they returned home. And the baby smiled in her sleep. Sometimes, Delilah thought about the day he knocked, how snow came in behind him like fate on the wind. How she almost didn't open the door. How she almost kept her quiet world exactly as it was. But love, she learned, doesn't always shout. Sometimes it knocks gently. And stays longer than expected. The town said she took him in. But that wasn't the truth. The truth was simpler. They took each other in. And neither one ever left.